Now, if you apply that sort of cost increase to the Lower Thames Crossing, because we can't trust National Highways figures, then we could be talking about a £12 billion road plus an extra £4 billion for all these additional schemes that will be needed. So we're talking potentially £16 billion.
Welcome to Calling All Stations, the transport podcast. I'm Christian Walmart, an author and journalist who has covered transport for the past 30 years. In every episode, we try to keep you up to date with the most engaging news stories, policy developments, and interviews in the transport world. And with me is my regular co-presenter, Mark Walker, who has spent decades looking at transport policies and legislation. So, Mark, what are we covering today?
Hello, Christian, and hello to our listeners. The theme of this episode is very much around roads and cars. Later on, we'll be having an interview that you've undertaken with Chris Todd, who is the founder and director of an organisation called the Transport Action Network, which is prominently campaigning at present against a proposed new road, something comparable to a motorway, called the Lower Thames Crossing, which has been proposed to link Essex and Kent. And Chris has been campaigning for rail and public transport-based alternatives to this proposed new road. But before that, we're going to talk about Tesla, because you can hardly turn on the news or visit any of the social media channels without seeing references to this automobile company and its famous owner and founder, Elon Musk. And perhaps you'd like to offer a few thoughts on these developments, Christian.
Well, yes, as you know, Mark, I've been following the driverless car issue for many years, and I'm a deep skeptic about driverless cars. But driverless cars are a very important part of the Tesla business model. So Tesla calls its autopilot or its driver aid, it calls it full self-driving, when actually it's nothing of the sort. It's basically some driver aids. You get kind of cruise control and lane kind of changing facility and all that kind of stuff that helps you drive a bit more easily, but it's nothing like full self-driving. You have to be in control the whole time. You have to keep your eye on the road the whole time, and you have to be able to intervene straight away. But it has sold itself and it has boosted its capital value to $700 billion, which is more than all the other auto manufacturers.
Just run that number past us again, Christian.
It's a difficult number, 700 billion, and that's much the basis because Elon Musk owns much of it. So that's much the basis of his worth, right? So this is not 700 million; it's 700 billion. It really is a kind of unfathomable figure. That's just the shares. The number of shares added to multiplied by their price, but and this, I just read in The Spectator, actually, the excellent business writer Martin van der Weyer, who says basically, this is the biggest hype ever and is bound to collapse. Now, there's two things why it's going to collapse, right? One is that this whole driverless future is a con. Tesla doesn't have the technical ability to enable its cars to be driverless. And that's a very simple reason for that, because it doesn't use LiDAR, which is a sort of laser kind of radar system that all the other driverless cars developers use, as well as cameras and sensors. And therefore, it's lagging well behind in its ability to create a full self-driving. Now, I'm skeptical about the other companies as well, but certainly Tesla is well behind on this. And yet its enormous share price, as Martin van der Weyer argues, is largely based on the fact that it will at some stage develop this full self-driving, and it will be able to then actually capture the whole market and be way ahead of everybody else, which is a complete con. But now the share price has collapsed by 50% since the beginning of the year. And that seems to be largely two reasons. One is the sales are not going very well. They haven't got a new model out, and the sales are kind of were beginning to fall anyway. But now it's become a completely toxic brand. So there's actually even been attacks on kind of Tesla dealerships in the United States.
Now, why could this possibly be, Christian?
I wonder why it could be. Now, it might just be tied to the fact that Elon Musk has really become Donald Trump's right-hand man, and is slashing kind of all sorts of government agencies, particularly much to the anger of lots of Americans, that veterans have been dismissed and from government jobs and so on, and he has just become toxic.
This is through his appointment as running the Doge, isn't it? The
yes.
Department of Government Efficiency.
Yes, absolutely.
Appointed
and not a Venetian overlord, because they're also called the Doges. But he is obviously very prominent. He's always more prominent than Trump, and he's bound to fall out with him at some stage. But in the meantime, he's become very unpopular, and he's made statements that he did that ridiculous arm motion that looked very much like a Nazi salute, which he denied that it was this straight after the inauguration. And then he's also said, well, Hitler didn't kill all these people, public sector people killed all these people, which is a kind of ludicrous kind of approach to understanding the Holocaust. And all this stuff has made him deeply unpopular. So in Europe, we've had falls of 40, 50, 60% of sales in various countries. And in the UK, they've held up for a little while, but they seem to be now collapsing. And indeed, only today I got an email from people representing fleet buyers saying that Tesla had become a toxic brand, that people that might be driving these cars don't want to be seen driving them. So in other words, the people for whom the fleet buyers are buying the cars don't want to be seen inside these cars because it's so toxic and so associated with a particularly right-wing form of politics. And therefore, the market seems to be bottoming out and falling at a great rate. And this raises an awful lot of questions. I mean, whether Tesla can survive. It is a very good car by all accounts. It's expensive.
I just wanted to say that, Christian, because when I first saw one, I think about 10 years ago, maybe, parked on a neighbour's drive, and I don't drive, and I'm not a car enthusiast, but I thought, what is that? I thought it was a beautiful thing, a beautifully designed vehicle, and was curious to know more about it. Yet today I walked past one parked in the street, and I found myself glaring at it as if that would have any effect at all on this inanimate object. But that was I found myself sort of bristling at the presence of.
Well, that's that is so interesting. Yes, I've been driven. I haven't driven them, but I've been driven a couple of times. It's very smooth. It accelerates very fast up to the speed. It's apparently very reliable. It has quite a long range for an electric car. There's a whole network of special chargers just for Tesla and so on. So it's you have to hand it to Musk. He has built up an amazing enterprise. But now there's a wider question here, because, as you know, he also owns Twitter, or X as he's renamed it. He also has a pretty successful space company called SpaceX, which has had a lot of launches, although it's had a couple of unsuccessful ones recently. But he's wants to get people to Mars and God knows what else. But if Tesla collapsed, it might undermine his other businesses. I suspect that X is losing a lot of money because he paid $44 billion for it, and it's certainly not worth that now. And he borrowed some money to do that. So it's all underpinned by his Tesla shareholding. So this kind of animosity towards Tesla from the general public might actually be deeply damaging to Musk and his other businesses.
So, Christian, you mentioned that there are other companies endeavoring to make strides with autonomous vehicles. Um, and they use a different technology using LiDAR. What's your assessment
That's
of
right.
that?
I mean, they have much more sophisticated equipment, much more equipment. And this LiDAR is a sort of way of being able to see objects that is not like a camera or sensor. It's a kind of, as I say, it's a kind of laser radar. That's basically what it is. But it means that Waymo, which is the main company involved, which is owned by Google, is technically way ahead of anybody else. I mean, it is already got robo taxis operating in 3 or 4 US cities, and it's expanding that. Now, there's still a lot of question marks about exactly how autonomous they are, how many people behind the scenes are actually in control or checking on these vehicles, whether they can drive in all weathers and conditions and all that sort of thing. But they are way ahead of Tesla. And in terms of electric vehicles, China, to where I'm going this week, as you know, is way ahead in terms of developing electric cars, cheaper electric cars. The Chinese company called BYD that has developed much kind of longer range and cheaper electric cars, and they are beginning to come to Europe, and that's going to create really undermine the European attempts to develop a proper electric cars. And so there's something of a trade and tariff war might kind of emerge from that, let alone the kind of Trump instituted tariff. So this is a very complex area where Tesla is up against it on all fronts, both in terms of electric cars, in terms of its self-driving cars, and in terms of its popularity. So watch this space. I mean, I'm not predicting that it's going to go bust, but I think it spells a lot of trouble for Elon Musk in the next few months.
The incoming government inherited a project known as the Lower Thames Crossing, which is a very large new road proposed under the Conservatives to link Essex and Kent, something comparable to a motorway in a tunnel. And the incoming government last autumn gave itself some time to consider whether or not to allow this project to go ahead, deferring a decision up to possibly as late as the 23rd of May 2025. It's a very expensive project and a very, very controversial one. And Christian has been speaking to Chris Todd, the founder and director of the Transport Action Network, who's campaigning against the Lower Thames Crossing and for some alternative transport schemes.
I'm talking to Chris Todd, the director of Transport Action Network, about what is probably the biggest road scheme in the offing, the Lower Thames Crossing, which initially seemed that the Labour Party and Labour government were going to scrap, but now there seems to be quite a lot of support for it within the party. So, Chris, tell me first of all about what this scheme is. It's called the Lower Thames Crossing, and presumably it's another way of getting cars across the Thames between Essex and Kent.
Yeah, it's a 14-mile road with a nearly 2.5-mile tunnel underneath the Thames, around Gravesend, and it's effectively a bypass of the Dartford crossing. So it's aiming to speed journeys between Kent and Essex, but particularly coming up from the Channel ports. It means a lot of the lorries can go up to the Midlands to the various distribution warehousing that's up there.
A lot of people might say, "Well, this is a good idea. The Dartford Tunnel is very crowded. Dartford crossings rather are very crowded. We need something that keeps people away from much of the southeast and London. Is this not a good idea?"
Superficially, you would think so. Build another road, we'll free up the traffic. But we've been trying this for about 100 years, and it's failed. Every time we build another road, particularly when it's next to a big city, it just fills up with traffic almost immediately. And that's exactly what's predicted with the Lower Thames Crossing. In fact, we're going to get 7 years of construction if this thing goes ahead. So that's chaos on the roads, that's delays, that's closures, lower speed limits. And the most we'll get in terms of benefits are around 5 years of traffic reduction at Dartford. Even then, it's going to be still above capacity. So the relief at Dartford is illusory, if you like, and it's not going to last very long for what it does. And at the same time, we are pouring billions and billions of pounds of public money into this. I mean, we might as well just dig a hole and chuck the money in there for the good it's going to do.
What sort of amount of money are we talking about? I understand that they've already spent more than £1 billion on just consultancy fees and the like.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole range. That's the planning application, that's doing surveys, that's consultations, that's actually buying up land as well. So, but yes, it's a huge amount of money, which could have gone to good. But it's predicted by National Highways to cost £9 to £10 billion in total. I mean, if that wasn't bad enough, it's likely to be a hell of a lot more. And the reason we say that is twofold. One is National Highways has taken out a lot of schemes and junction expansions that will need to happen to make the Lower Thames Crossing function. That could be up to another £4 billion worth of roads.
Well,
that
connected schemes that you need to feed into this road.
Yeah, and there's one at the moment that Kent County Council is consulting on, the A229, for example, which is directly linked, the need for it is directly linked to the Lower Thames Crossing. That's £250 million. There's a couple of junctions in Essex which will be at capacity on day one that the Lower Thames Crossing opens. Those are vital junctions for the Thames Gateway Port and Tilbury Port to get their vehicles out onto the road network. So these are things that are not just nice to have, but they'll be critical to ensure that the road network keeps moving. So the true cost is probably another £4 billion. But aside from that, we've just seen from with the M3 Junction 9 approval by government, that's a scheme in Hampshire, but the scheme costs have shot up 35% in just 2 years. And there's absolutely no reason for that, because National Highways, when it went to examination, said this scheme will cost £215 million. That includes risks and inflation.
And then they put it up anyway.
2 years later, it's now £290 million. Now, if you apply that sort of cost increase to the Lower Thames Crossing, because we can't trust National Highways figures, then we could be talking about a £12 billion road plus an extra £4 billion for all these additional schemes that will be needed. So we're talking potentially £16 billion.
So your argument is that this is really out of control, as it were. But hold on a sec, because suddenly, the Labour Party, Rachel Reeves, the tight hand of the Treasury, seems to like this. Is that your feeling? Have they moved towards supporting this?
Yes and no. I mean, they like it so much, apparently, on one hand, but they don't like it so much that they're willing to provide public finance for it. So it would suggest that their liking of the scheme is somewhat lukewarm, because otherwise you would find the public money for it and you would put the public investment in. If it was such a good deal for the taxpayer, you would just spend the money.
Right.
but it's not. I mean, even National Highways' own figures with its reduced costs, the scheme is barely breaking even in terms of economic benefit. So why Rachel Reeves or the Treasury is even considering this scheme does beg a belief, to be honest, because if you look at the facts and you look behind the facts of what National Highways is telling them as well, and you see a scheme that doesn't perform very well for Dartford, is going to cost vast sum of money, and it's actually going to deliver very little economic benefit. And if they're for a government that is focused on house building, is actually going to impede Thurrock, for example, with delivering on its local plan and the housing numbers in that local plan.
You say they're not putting public money into it, so they're expecting some sort of private finance initiative scheme, are they?
Well, that's been touted, and National Highways has just responded to the Secretary of State, Heidi Alexander, on a consultation around funding models for the Lower Thames Crossing. And it put forward three suggestions. One was totally public, one was a mixture of public and private, along sort of design, build, finance, operate, and maintain model, which was the most expensive. And then the final one was a private entity, where the private finance would be sought for most of the scheme costs, which they put at around £6 billion. But we don't believe that would be enough.
And they would recoup that through tolls, presumably.
Yes, but I mean, looking at the figures, you would have to substantially increase the tolls to recoup that money. So for the private entity to pay the interests on the loan of that finance, we reckon you'd have to raise the tolls 2 to 3 times potentially, and not
which would be what? Which would be how much?
Well, the current car, for example, costs £2.50 if you don't have a prepaid account. If you have a prepaid account, it's £2 a go. So potentially you're looking at something 2 to 3 times that value in terms of tolls. And as soon as you go down that route, you immediately have a 20% penalty because they have to start charging VAT because it's a private entity. At the moment, Dartford Crossing is run by a public body, even if there's a contract for a private operator to take the money for the public body. So there's no VAT payable. So while businesses can reclaim VAT, the ordinary person who drives around, for leisure or whatever, they would be subject to a 20% increase straight away.
Okay, so if this is not viable, but we do know that there are traffic problems around there, what's your alternative, Chris?
Well, I mean, I think we were shocked when we looked at this that no one has seriously looked at the alternatives. I mean, in 2009, all they seem to have done is sort of looked at a map of the Thames, seen that there was no crossing of the river by rail at that point, and so in that case, there's no option for a rail alternative, so we'll have to build a road. I mean, that's a sort of superficial level they seem to have looked at this problem at. I mean, even then, it sort of does beg a belief because there is no public transport or rail crossing for miles around. I mean, now there is. In 2009, there wasn't. There was just the construction of HS1 was happening, but it doesn't deal so much with local transport. And you would have thought the obvious thing is we've got all these road connections at Dartford. Surely we need a public transport connection at Dartford to reduce the pressure on the roads and to give people real alternatives. And that's why we commissioned a report by Jonathan Roberts Consulting. He came up with the proposal that you could put a heavy rail link at Dartford. It would generate 50 to 100 million passenger journeys, and with some investment in changes to track gauge and other things that you would need to do to improve rail freight opportunities, you could actually remove over 500,000 to 1 million HGVs off our roads every year. So that would make a significant difference to the traffic levels in and around the Dartford area, while also increasing opportunities for nearly 250,000 households who don't have access to a car. And those people are completely excluded by a Lower Thames Crossing solution at the moment.
So you've drawn up a report to that effect, which is available publicly, is it?
Yeah, we've got on the back of his report, which provides the sort of intellectual basis, if you like, for ours, we've produced a report called Essex-Kent Superlinks, highlighting that there are quite a number of ways that you could improve connectivity across the Thames in the Dartford, Gravesham area, including looking at there's a new tram link for local journeys, also looking at reinstating one or two of the ferry services that have disappeared over the years, because all of that or loss of public transport connectivity across the Thames in that area, or the lack of it, has led to the increase in pressure on the Dartford crossings, road crossings. And only by giving people real choice and opportunities to travel in different ways will you reduce that pressure permanently at Dartford. Building another road, as we've seen, and as by the projections from National Highways, will not solve the problems at Dartford.
Oh, well, thank you, Chris. And presumably you're trying to have a word with Rachel Reeves about this?
We're trying to have a word with whoever will listen about this, because we feel what we've produced in the Essex-Kent Superlinks is a real opportunity for the government to do, to really boost growth. The cost of it, we estimate, is a fraction of what the Lower Thames Crossing will cost. It will save lives and serious injuries on our roads, because the Lower Thames Crossing is projected to increase deaths and serious injuries, which will reduce pressure on emergency services in the NHS. By providing more people with opportunities and links across the Thames, it will improve their economic abilities to actually earn money and help boost GDP in a far more effective way than a road crossing would. So I think there's lots of wins coming out of looking at the Lower Thames Crossing again and looking at alternative solutions along the lines that we're proposing.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. And let's hope that when the spending review comes round and further kind of iterations of it come round, that the government will see sense over this. But thank you very much for coming on Calling All Stations.
Thanks very much for having me.
Here's Christian's final thought from the Departure Lounge.
Well, this is about another large tech company in the United States, and this is Uber, which is actually, oddly enough, trying to impose a 20% increase in the fares of taxis and private hire vehicles around the country. Now, why is it doing that? So the 20% is VAT, because they forced to charge VAT since it's been decided that they actually employ their drivers rather than the drivers being self-employed. But outside London, there is completely different legislation around taxis and private hire vehicles. And for a long time, for decades, there's been no VAT charged on fares outside London. But Uber, because of its need to actually employ people, has to pay the 20%. So it wants to ensure that everybody else has to pay the 20%, as it were, to even up the playing field. Although, Uber is a company that is not really into leveling up the playing field generally, but that's another matter. So these firms outside, a couple of firms outside London have created a £500,000 fighting fund to take the case to the Supreme Court to ensure that they don't have to pay this 20%, which of course they would have to pass on to their users. So this is really gearing up to be a big battle with major consequences for the taxi industry throughout the country, apart from in London.
Calling All Stations, the Transport Podcast with Christian Walmart, is produced by Cogitamus Limited, a leading provider of public affairs consultancy services in the sector. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please consider giving us a 5-star rating with whichever platform you use. Do follow us on social media channels, including Blue Sky, Facebook, and X, formerly known as Twitter. Our handle on X is @AllStationsPod.